All right, hello. Can everybody hear me in the back? Way back there? I'm kind of soft-spoken, so I have to test out these things. Okay. All right, so welcome. This session is called PrimeNG, Native UI Components for Angular. Is everybody enjoying the conference? This is my first time, so I'm enjoying it. I think it's really cool. So does anyone like fair day better than the previous day? Just different vibe? More food, I guess? Better presentations, okay. That doesn't bode well for me, I guess. All right, cool. All right, well, my name's Kito. I'm the principal consultant at my own little firm called Virtua, where we do a training consulting, mentoring, et cetera, with a whole bunch of different technologies, but a lot of front-end stuff and also some Java EE stuff as well, and also Polymer web components and PrimeNG, stuff like that. And for years, we've been an official partner of a company called PrimeTech, which produces PrimeNG and also produces another product called PrimeFaces. And we're pleased to be working with them on the Angular side of things with PrimeNG. How many people here have ever written any Java code? All right, good. Okay. So there's a podcast called the Enterprise Java Newscast that I'm the co-host of. We actually talk about lots of different technologies, not just Java. We talk about actually Angular and web components and front-end development and everything related to enterprise development. So if you like podcasts, you should check that out. Okay, so what is PrimeNG? Angular is all about components, right? But when it comes to actually building an application, you need actual real widgets to work with that can make your application look good without you spending lots of time trying to get the perfect data scroller component written. So PrimeNG provides over 70 responsive UI components that are actually native to Angular. And it's really easy to use, and you'll see some examples of how you can just very easily use a PrimeNG component. Also has accessibility built in, which is an important thing for enterprise development and governments. And it's open source. And it's also derived from the PrimeFaces product that I mentioned earlier. How many people have heard of PrimeFaces? I'm just curious. So there's a few of you out there. Okay. So PrimeFaces is a product from the Java world. And it's built on a technology called Java Server Faces, which has been around a long time and came around really before the rise of all the JavaScript web frameworks out there. But over the years, PrimeFaces has really become the #1 set of UI components for building these Java JSF applications. And what that means is that PrimeTech has really gained a lot of experience building UI components that work for enterprises and government organizations, and also startups and smaller companies as well. And I've been happy to work with them along the way, doing a lot of training, consulting, mentoring, that kind of stuff. And what's interesting is sort of watching the journey of this product, because we had PrimeFaces, great product, but Angular 2 was coming out, and I was talking to the lead developer about what to do next in terms of UI components. We talked about web components, things like that, which I'm very, very interested in. But we also talked about Angular. And basically, they decided to double down on Angular 2 at the time. And now it's been over a year later, and there's a really beautiful set of components. And what's interesting is that the initial code that was used for PrimeNG came partially from PrimeFaces and also from another project called PrimeUI, which is just pure JavaScript widgets that have no tie to any particular framework. And over time, a lot of the internals of those components morphed because a lot of them use jQuery internally. Because if you wrote components a few years ago, you probably used jQuery, right? But what's happened over time is these components have evolved to become pure Angular components. That there's very, very little jQuery. Usually it's in a third-party extension that's being wrapped. So it's really nice to have a really powerful set of native Angular components. And another question we always get is who uses this product? So it's open source, but it's also a professional enterprise-grade product. And these are just a few of the companies. There's plenty of other ones as well. But the key thing is that they're designed to be enterprise ready, but also, obviously, if you're not enterprise, they're great to use as well. And what we've seen from Prime phases is that it's been very popular in governments and large companies. And I think we'll see the same thing with PrimeNG, but also the Angular space has a lot more sort of dynamic group of people, right? Not all big companies, lots of startups, lots of individuals. So we're happy to provide a product for them as well. All right, so let's get into it. Let's look at the demo. So if you go to this URL here, well, that's not it. If you go to primefaces.org, PrimeNG, you'll find this showcase. And what's nice about this showcase is that not only is it a great way to look at all the components, but it's also an Angular app, okay? So anything you see here, you can actually mess with on your own if you just clone the PrimeNG repository and run the app. And actually, so what I'm running here is actually my local installation of the app. But there's lots of different components, and there's everything from let me just reload this just to be safe. From basic input controls all the way down to data components, charts, menus, etc. So I want to start by looking at a very simple example. So, the very common thing you might want is an input control, right? And you can, of course, use your standard input control. It works fine. But by using the PrimeNG components, you get all the theming that's built in. We'll talk a little bit more about themes in a minute. But by using the PrimeNG versions, you actually get access to sort of integrating with the look and feel of the rest of the PrimeNG components. And how many people attended the material talk yesterday on the evolution of material? I didn't see that. That's a different one, I guess. But basically, the components have sort of two different approaches, right? They have the directive approach and then the pure component approach. And PrimeNG has really tried to pick the right tool for the job. So they didn't reinvent the input control. They just added a directive for it. Okay. So basically, just by having your very simple input control and then using the p-input-text directive, you basically get a prime input control, right? Nothing too exciting about this one. But what's key here is that all these components, they're very easy to use with the Angular CLI or in a project that doesn't use the CLI. So using it is just like any other module, right? This is what you would put in your app module. And then the source for this is really just a very simple, input control. And the beauty of using a directive here is that, all of the standard attributes for an input are already there. You don't have to reinvent the wheel for them. So we can move on to something a little bit more interesting. Here is an input switch component. So I love these. I think we've all decided these are much cooler than checkboxes, as long as you have the screen real estate. So just a simple toggle, right? And again, it's got a very simple usage pattern, right? You've got your model, you have a check property, and that's what you use as your ng model. Okay. And also, if you are using model-driven forms, all of the input controls work fine with those as well, so that's not an issue. And as you get to more complicated components, you'll find more features, right? So there's lots of different attributes you can provide as well. And for something like this, it's really just the labels that you want to use, whether you want to what you want to say when the input switch is toggled on and off. Okay. So here it's a customized label. This is the default. So then we can go to some things which are a little more interesting. So, if you want to have an actual text editor in your application, you can do that as well. Now, PrimeNG did not write a text editor from scratch. This is a wrapper around Quill, okay? And Quill is a pretty nice little editor. But the key here is that you don't have to actually import Quill and try to get to look good with Prime faces and try to integrate with Angular. That work is done for you, okay? And we can do all your sort of basic stuff here. And you can see here's the value that's actually being passed to the Angular component, okay? And you can also use all of the customization features that Quill has available, okay? So again, the usage is really simple, you basically import the module. Shared module is something which is used by all of the PrimeNG components. And you basically can bind it up to your model, and you basically get a string back, right? So the string is going to have whatever formatting the Quill editor has applied to it. So you see up here, we actually see the HTML generated here, okay? Excuse me. All right, so another one that I like is the chips component. I think these are cute. So this is the component where you basically put in multiple values, multiple values, have a little chip, and you can select and deselect from them, And what's nice is a lot of the PrimeNG components also make use of Angular templates so that you can provide custom layout and formatting for different parts of your component. So if you wanted to actually do something different, you can, right? So here we have a custom template that actually has a little icon and some additional text, okay? So if you look down here, this is that example here with the P chips, and then here's the ng template right here, okay? Can you guys read this in the back? All right, cool. I like these screens, they're pretty good. All right, so, and then just like all the other ones, there are different attributes you can use to customize them. All right, so those are basic input controls. Obviously, there's more. I'm not going to go through every component, but I'm just trying to give you a sense of what's available and how they all kind of work, okay? Another sort of popular area are data controls, right? So I think there's probably two that I think are pretty cool. Of course, there's things like trees and tree table and stuff like that, which are cool for, especially for financial applications where you really need to condense a lot of data. Data scroller, I think, is a good one because it gives you a few different possibilities for how you want to do scrolling, right? So you can do scrolling to sort of this way. You can dynamically load additional records, okay? You can also control whether you want the scroll bar to be inline or not. Okay. Okay. So then you see we're loading more as we go on. Okay. And if you want, you can actually just just wire up an event handler to load more records there as well. And of course, you can do the requisite infinite scrolling, right, where you just scroll on forever, right? And what's nice about this is that the approach is just really straightforward. I know we've all worked with different frameworks and different components that have different ways of handling that lazy loading of data, right? So the PrimeNG approach is basically, let me see if I can find the right example. Here we go. To just have a very simple callback event handler that you can implement. And basically, it takes an event. The event has first rows, and then you do whatever you need to do. You talk to your service, or maybe you have some records in memory. You just want to splice an array. Who knows? But it's a very simple callback, and it works very efficiently for just loading more records into the DOM. Okay. All right. So then there is the popular component, which I think is popular in every single business application. I often wonder if one day we'll come up with a metaphor better than the grid. I don't think we have quite yet. But the grid, the prime faces grid is definitely the best grid I've ever worked with. And having worked with different grids over the years, I'm very happy to see the progress of the data table for PrimeNG. And as you can see, it has lots of different features, right? So I'm not going to go through all of these. But of course, you can very easily get a basic table. You also can do dynamic columns, which is a very common thing when you know that the actual data you're going to display is going to depend upon something back from the server. Maybe only some people can see certain fields. Maybe some fields are going to be hidden and shown. Who knows? So let's see if we can find the... Let's go back to the dynamic columns here. Which I'm not actually seeing. All right, so if we look at, here's an example. So there's the p column component, but also you can use it to render dynamic columns as well. Another thing I want to look at is facets. So facets is a common term in the JSF space. Basically, it just means a named child component that has some feature. In web components land, it's essentially a slot into the shadow DOM. But basically, it just makes it easy for you to say, OK, I have my component, and then I want to have some child component that has some feature that's related to it. So for data tables, the common thing is a header and a footer. So if we look at this, we see p header and p footer here. Okay, and of course, you can put whatever content you want in there. And also, when it comes to the data that you want to put inside of your individual columns, you can actually use templating there. Okay, so you see we're changing things dynamically. We have the ability to handle selection here. Okay. And so this is basically the deal, is that for any column, you can, of course, just have this field be a property of the car, right? Which is basically just saying, OK, I'm iterating through other cars, and this is going to display that property. Okay? So you notice the usage is slightly different than the ng repeat, right? It's a little bit different, but the features are pretty much the same, or ng4. So here is the example of using that template. And you see we basically done some additional styling for this column only. Okay. And for the column that has the select button, you see it's a prime faces button, and we're just handling the click event. Okay. And what the click event is doing is actually calling the select car method, which is adding a message to this messages array. Okay, so this is another prime faces feature, which is a message, sort of a very simple way to display messages. There's two components. There's a growl component and a message component, which we can look at in more detail. But essentially, what's happening here is we're updating the array of messages. Those messages are actually, they're not shown here, but they are right here. They're bound to this growl up here. Okay, so when that value changes, we're getting this nice little growl at the top. Okay. So another common thing is having an editable data table. Okay, so this is basically the feature to have inline cells being editable. Okay. So basically, for any of these fields, you can just click on it and then change the value. And you notice you can also put in custom, like additional components. It's not just limited to a simple edit control. Okay. So here, I'm changing the value here. Okay. But also, I can pick from a drop down here. Okay. And here, I can get a calendar component. So there's also a calendar component as well. Okay. And the way this works is pretty straightforward. So again, we're iterating through all the cars, right? And here we're saying that the field that we're operating on, the property of the car, is brand, okay? And we're saying that it's editable. So then inside of it, we can throw in an ng template if we want to customize it so it's not just a simple input control. And we can use the p dropdown component, which is another input control from PrimeNG. And you can basically bind that directly to that car that's being displayed. Okay. All right, so that's the editable feature. Of course, there's also lazy loading. It's also really easy to do CRUD stuff. So here is a very simple CRUD example. You can delete, you can add. Etc. And what's nice about this is you don't really have to do anything special. Okay. So here's that data table again, right? There is a row selection event. There's some other features, okay? And basically what happens, excuse me, is when you click on the Add button, we're going to be launching this show dialog to add method, okay? Show dialog to add basically just creates a new car and then displays the dialog, okay? That dialog is bound to the car, which is basically the currently selected car, okay? So all of the fields in here, whether it's like the input text or et cetera, they're all pointing to car, which is the currently selected car, the one that we just added, okay? And then when someone clicks on the save button, okay, we go back to our component, and we basically just push a new car, right? So the grid actually handles all of the change detection to update the display and everything for you. Okay, so probably there's only a couple more things here. Filtering is a big thing, and what I really like about the PrimeNG filtering is that the input controls for the filtering columns are customizable. That's not always the case. Sometimes you get like a very simple input control. You're like, okay, well, what if I want it to be a slider? What if I want it to be a dropdown? What if I want it to be an autocomplete, right? So here you see a few different options. There's, you know, an input a dropdown, right? This is a multi-selection one. This is just a regular input control. And then there's a slider for the year, okay? And again, all of this works the way, you know, pretty similarly, right? So what we're using for this is, again, a template, right? So inside of the year, we just throw in another ng template, okay? We use the p slider, okay? And we've got a property, a model called year filter, okay? And basically, you know, you could put this in a probably a larger application. You probably would put this behind an actual method, but you can see how it works, right? Basically, you just call filter on the data table, and you're good to go. Pass in the field and the match mode you're dealing with and the value that you want to filter on. So basically, just by adding a template and binding the right way and then calling the filter method, you basically can use any control you want inside of there for the header, okay? You can also do global filtering. So, you know, I could do like here. All right, so there's my global filter. And basically, you see the global filter has a name here that's defined, and then we just reference it here as the global filter. So it's like pretty much very easy to just wire these things up together. Okay. All right, so I could go on more, but that's the quick data table overview. There's also, you know, some very nice little panel components. Probably the most interesting one in the applications I've worked on would be the tab view. Right, so you've got your sort of standard tab component, okay? But it's also got some handy little features. You can close tabs, okay? And also you can, of course, be notified of any particular event. You can also change the orientation. You don't always want your tabs on the top, right? Or maybe you want that to be a user preference, okay? And essentially, all you need to do is put your content inside of each tab. It's pretty straightforward. Another thing that you get with PrimeNG is the grid CSS feature. And this is just a simple fluid grid library, but it's used throughout all the PrimeNG demos, and it's really easy to use in your app. So if you're not already using some sort of grid layout library, grid CSS is pretty easy to use. There's nothing that says you have to use it, though, but it is just easy to use if you don't have something already. So basically, just by using a few different CSS selectors, you can get a 12-column layout, and you can also have it optimized and adjust responsively as well. So, like most of these grid libraries, you just need to learn a few different styles. This is a 4-column, 6-column, etc. Okay. So that's grid CSS. There's some other panel components as well. I like the toolbar because a toolbar is a pretty easy thing to write on your own. Put a div and a little bit of styling. But it's nice to have just a very easy way to throw a toolbar at the top of the page. And with this, you can do that, and you can also do some adjustment in terms of where you want the actual buttons to be on the page or inside of the toolbar, whether you want it to be on the left or the right, et cetera, et cetera. All right. So probably the only other ones I think I'll go over is tooltip, which is, of course, handy, right? So these aren't all very complicated, but the benefit is that you get kind of all of them together. So they allow you to do a lot of things that you might spend time on. So basically, you just add this p-tooltip directive. And you can also do things like set up the position, whether you want it to be the top or bottom, et cetera, et cetera. Dialog is a good one because how many people have written a dialog component before? Yeah, see, this is why this is a good one. Now, it may be possible that there's some dialog that is super special for your application that no one else would ever write, but a lot of times you just need a simple confirmation dialog that doesn't look like the browser dialog, right? So dialog gives you that. And there's nothing really special about it, except it just makes it really easy to do a dialog. So if we look at the source here, this is the dialog itself. Okay. Obviously, you're going to want to have some sort of visible property to hide or show it, right? You can make it modal or not. And we'll talk about responsiveness a little bit later, but every component pretty much allows you to make it responsive if you want to. Okay. And then in the button here at the bottom, we basically just change the display value to false, right? Very easy. But also, when you want to show the dialog, you basically can just set display to true and show it, right? So you get just very easy to use dialog to throw in your app. There's also the confirmation dialog, which is cool because it actually uses observables, so you can actually have something a little more interactive. So you sure you want to do this action? Yes. OK. So here the difference is that we still have the pconfirm dialog, but here what we're doing is we're basically just calling a method to execute the dialog, and you want to get notified later, right? So if we look at confirm1 here, basically we're going to a confirmation service, and then what we want to do, the confirmation service is basically a service provided by PrimeNG, which lets you fire off the confirmation dialog, okay? And basically what we're saying is when they select it, that's when we do some work, right? So this handles the problem when you write a confirmation dialog or some dialog where you want to do some input based on the operation, but it's another callback that you have to write, okay? All right. So I'm just going to jump ahead here. There's a few other ones. This is one of the ones I've used on a project in the past called the megamenu, which I like. So if you have some application that has like tons and tons of operations, and this is one of the situations where you fight with the stakeholder and say, you don't need a menu that big. There's better ways to do navigation. But they say, no, it has to be a huge menu. So this lets you do that. So basically, you can use this to display a complicated menu. And all of the menu components use this menu model API, okay, which looks like this. So basically, anytime you have an item in a menu, you just create a nested arrays of these objects with label and items. You can go as deep as you want to, Okay? And what's nice is that the menu model works with all the different menu components. So if you decide that, really the megamenu isn't the best choice, let's try a different one, you can just swap it out. Okay? So this is another popular one, which is the slide menu, which I've become a lot more popular lately. And again, you can tell it uses the same model because it's hierarchical, right? So this is the initialization part. Slide menu, again, you just pointed to the model, okay? And that's pretty much it, whether you want it to be a pop-up or not, okay? All right, so one of the things, let me move on. So I've gotten through some of these components. Obviously, there's more. There are, charts. These are built on top of chart.js. Okay, so this is not the most extensive chart library in the world, but it's a good start. And so if you've got basic chart needs, it'll work out well for you. If someone just says, hey, throw a line chart in the page, you're good to go. Okay. We talked about the messages. There's also multimedia stuff. There's drag and drop support. There's also things like file upload, stuff like that. So. Does this actually work on the demo site? Actually, no, this is local. It's not going to work. There's no server. Okay. And there's some other little goodies in here as well, like a progress bar, code highlighter, which is used in all the demos, things like that. Another thing I want to talk about in general, now that you've gotten a good handle on sort of how the components work, is responsiveness. So this is one of the things that's been baked into these components from day one, which is the idea of actually being responsive. So let's go back to the data table here. Okay. And we'll pick the responsive one. Okay. So you'll notice in the markup here, we have responsive equals true. Okay. So what this means is that now, if we have to do any resizing here, we get some good behavior. So let me try going to smaller. Okay. All right, so now you see, I'll make this bigger. Actually, I guess I can't. We actually collapsed it, to one single column, okay? All right. And if I just make it a little bit bigger, you can see that we get the columns back. You can also have more control, like maybe dropping off one or two along the way as well. And what's nice here is that, this is pretty much true for all of the components. So you see now we've got this menu at the left here, okay? If we go into, I don't know, data list here. This isn't going to change very much. But basically, they'll all give you some level of responsiveness, which is pretty handy. So this means that it's pretty easy to write an app that's a desktop app, but also looks decent on phone. It's not going to be Cordova, but it's going to give you a good experience as well. They also work well with touch in general. All right, so that's sort of a quick overview of the components themselves. I also want to talk for a minute about theming, okay? So basically, one of the things I really like, or one of the things you pretty much need anytime you work with components is some idea of a theme, right? And you may have a design team that has a theme in mind, or you may just need to get something out of the box that looks halfway decent, which is usually the case I'm in. So out of the box, you get about 16 free themes. And what's nice about them is that they have sort of the color separated from the structure. So there's what we call structural CSS, which is padding, layout, margins, etc. Okay? And then there is the skinning part. Okay? So the structural CSS is usually sort of global initially. So PrimeNG has defaults for the structural elements. But some themes may override that. okay? But then when you're working with a PrimeNG application, you also have a better understanding of how it works. Some things are just going to be layouts, and some things are actually going to be actual colors, okay? So the skinning CSS gives you colors, borders, background images, etc. Okay. So let's take a quick look at this. Well, the other thing is that there's Font Awesome included. So how many people are not familiar with Font Awesome? Okay. See, whenever you say not, no, like people don't raise their hand, I've noticed. So congratulations for admitting. But Font Awesome is just a library of cool icons you can use. I should mention actually before the demo is that these are all built on Theme Roller. So all of the CSS selectors that are used are all built on Theme Roller, which makes it pretty easy to build your own custom theme as well. Okay. So if you take a look at themes, and I'll go back to the data table just because it has more stuff on it. It's easier to show. All right, so for the most part, the thing that you'll see when you change themes is going to be colors, right? So change the flick theme. Not too much changed here. You know, we saw that the header changed. Some are going to be more drastic. All right, pepper grinder, and this, of course, should be obvious here. All right. And as you see, you can actually change themes dynamically, which means that if you have that as a user preference, you can actually have the user say, OK, this is my favorite theme, et cetera. Or let's say you need to do branding so that your application has a certain theme for some clients versus others. Very easy to do that. And if we take a look at the CSS, all right. And it never looks that good when you do it this big. All right. All right, so if we look at, let's say we just go down here and look at the data table, all right? Okay, so this is the P data table element. Okay, if we look at the selectors here, actually we need to go one step down. There we go. So you see we have UI data table and UI widget, okay? So every PrimeNG component has this UI widget selector, okay? So when you're actually doing your own theming and your own styling, you can have an idea about, okay, every UI component has a UI widget. There are other CSS selectors that every class has, every component has. And inside of the demo, it'll tell you what all the CSS selectors are, okay? So you can see here data list has UI data list, et cetera, okay? So as you work more with these components, you get a handle on how the CSS selectors work, which lets you understand better what things you can change and how to change them, okay? So for example, I know that every component uses UI widget, right? So that means if I just go here and change the font size for UI widget, and let me turn off the mobile tools there, to 2em. Woo, whoa, okay, now everything's big, right? And that would actually go across other components as well, okay? So, and I could also change the global font, et cetera, okay? Another nice thing about the themes is, although this is not a requirement for you if you develop your own custom theme, all the free ones that are included are all just using CSS, SCSS. So they're all Sass. So if you were to look at one of these, let's look at, I don't know. We'll look at Omega, because that's a big one, okay? All right, so we've got all the colors defined, right? And Omega is a little more complicated, so it also has, additional fonts that it uses and customization it makes to all sorts of different properties, okay? But you see this UI widget header. This is going to be used in many different components that use that selector. Not every, it's not like there's a different header CSS selector for every single component that has a header, okay? Also, the simpler themes are really just colors, right? So just by looking at this, it's really easy to see how you could build your own theme, right? You've got the colors, and then the structural theme stuff is here. So this is sort of the global selectors that are set. So this also gives you an idea about how PrimeNG by default is associating the selectors with the theme colors. Okay. All right, so that's the quick theme overview. Okay, another thing I want to talk about are the application templates. Okay, so PrimeNG is very much an open source project. You can get it from NPM very easily. All the instructions are in the PrimeNG showcase, so it tells you how to get it from NPM, tells you how to integrate it with your the CLI if you want to. But there's also some premium products which are the application templates. And basically, they just make it easier if you're building a whole app that you want to use the PrimeNG components. You can actually get one of these templates, and they just let you get started very easily. They're fully integrated with the Angular CLI. They're also touch optimized. They're built with Sass as well, CSS3, HTML5, etc. And they have a commercial license. They're actually really cheap considering what you get. If you're interested in these, you should go to the PrimeNG booth. They're out there. They tell you more about that. But I'll talk to you about the technical side. So basically, what they give you is something like this. All right. So you get sort of a nice little starter app, right? And essentially, let's go to the start here. Okay. There we go. That's a little better. Okay. So it gives you sort of an idea of how you can use all of these components together and what that might look like. Okay. And each one of the premium templates gives you a different theme, which different attributes. So, like for example, I'll show you another one which uses material design. This one does not. It uses a flat design. And this is, I think, one of the key things about PrimeNG is that it's design language agnostic. It doesn't care about, as the framework, it doesn't care about whether you're using material design or you have this awesome designer that insists on coming up with something brand new. It just provides you the tools to get what you need to do done. Okay? So if you use PrimeNG and you decide, well, your designer has a very specific way they want to do things, they don't want to use material design just because they don't want to look like Google, which is not obvious reason, then you can actually come up with your own theme. And that looks completely different, or you can try one of these ones as well. Okay? So this is what the template looks like out of the box. None of this stuff does anything, right? It just gives you an idea of how you can put all this stuff together to look a certain way, okay? And also, it uses a lot of the different components, okay? The other thing is, which is nice, is that you can actually look at all of the components using this particular theme. So if you want to see, okay, how does everything look, using this theme? You have examples of everything and how they work. Okay. And there's form examples, etc. You can see what the invalid styling is like, things like that. Also, each of the templates actually comes with a whole bunch of themes. So the templates give you more scaffolding than just a theme. It's basically like a whole sort of application layout, which you can customize however you want, and then you can change colors using different themes. So each of these templates has some different themes that you can use. See, the changes are somewhat subtle. Okay. So on my machine here, I have one of these themes. This is the it's Ultima. All right, and so this is what you get. You just get a simple project to start with. It supports the Angular CLI out of the box. Okay. And you get a simple app and demonstrations with different views out of the box. Okay. And so I'm just going to run one of these. Actually, I think I'm already running. Okay. So you see I just ran ng-serve, and now I'm running this premium template locally. Okay. So this is the Ultima theme. All right. Okay. Well, looks like maybe I didn't start the host. It looks like I seem to have, I seem to have broken my local install, so I'll go to the PrimeNG one. Oh wait, that was the wrong one. I need to go to Ultima. Okay. All right, so this is another one, and you can see it has a similar idea, right? Just sort of a dashboard page, page to show you what's going on. But also, there are a few different things here. There's one of the things that I like about this one is since this one is actually a material design theme. You can see just by looking at the input controls. But also, they've imported all of the material design icons. So all these are included. Now, obviously, it's not hard to do that yourself, but it's nice to have it just sort of be included. And there's little things you can do, like, where is that? You can change the size, compact size. You can change how you want the menus to behave, okay? Whether you want it to be horizontal, vertical. Little things, inline profile, et cetera, okay? And again, this one lets you have a lot of different colors as well, okay? And what's cool is that the templates, because they're, it's actual sort of a starter app, you get it, and you actually, if you look at the app module, it has like every single PrimeNG component you could possibly want, right? You don't have to go add each one individually. Now, granted, you might want to remove some, but they're all there. And then, of course, you get examples of actually using all this stuff. And you also have a very simple header, menu, and footer, right? And also, you can see an example of some additional custom components. So the app menu component is specific to this particular theme. And you can see sort of how it works and how it uses the PrimeNG stuff inside of it, okay? The other thing that you get are a whole bunch of these just very simple sample pages. So this is cool for if you actually are starting a new project from scratch. You can say, I have a login page, woohoo! And I have seen people do this before. It's like, okay, they start with all the sample pages up front, and then, of course, they may customize them over time, okay? All right, so that's the premium app template demo. I just want to mention that they are giving away one of these themes at the PrimeNG booth. So if you stop by, you can get one at the end of the day, right? So I encourage you to check that out. And I'm trying to wrap up 10 minutes before because I think there's another presentation starting right at 3. So I'd right at 2. Do you have a question? Okay, so the question is, what about accessibility? And this is definitely one of the key things that's gone into these components, and that's largely because they often use, well, basically, PrimeTech has a lot of experience with governments. So I've worked on projects before with, working on a lot of accessibility issues with this team, where I was, a consultant working for a state government, and we had requirements. I actually wrote tests for all of these different accessibility features. So a lot of that has gone into PrimeNG as well. Okay. All right, so last thing I want to say is that PrimeNG is open source, 100% open source. If you're working for a big company or a small company that wants premium support, they can get it from PrimeNG. And in the US, my company does training and consulting and that kind of stuff as well. And I was going to put up the slides until I realized that they don't really say much. So, so I'm not bothering with the slides. If you want it, the best place to go is really, go to the PrimeNG demo, take a look at that. and fork the PrimeNG repo and play with it. That's the best way, because it has the sample, it has the showcase in there. And you can play with the showcase, you can look at it, change it, see how things work. Okay. I think there's also a book coming out soon as well. Question? Does it have what support? Actually, does it have it RTL? Some themes. Okay. So the question was, does it have RTL support? And the answer is some themes do. So it depends on the theme. Okay. If you want to ask me more questions, I'll be in the AMA. Ask me anything from 2:30 to 3, which is very soon, in the Vienna room. Okay. All right. Thank you very much.